This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and today is Friday, and that means it's time for the 531st MTG Top 10. Most of the time with this series, I look at how good or how bad cards are. But sometimes I like to do something a little bit different, and back in 2019, in the 154th MTG Top 10, I gave my picks for the game's 10 biggest flavor fails. Now, almost 4 years later, I thought it was a time to take a look at some other major flavor fails in Magic the Gathering. In Magic, and in game design more generally, flavor refers to how well a card's effect aligns with what the card is meant to represent. So when I say flavor fail, I'm referring to the fact that a card has an effect that doesn't make a whole lot of sense based on the card's name, art, and/or flavor text. For example, back in that 2019 list, I talked about the fact that Pin to the Earth doesn't actually take flying away from creatures, and it really should, since, you're pinning something to the earth. The fact a flyer still flies when enchanted with this makes no sense. That is an example of a flavor fail. So, let's dive in today with a look at another 10 major flavor fails in Magic the Gathering. At number 10, I have Indestructible Aura. So, this one's interesting because when it was originally printed, it definitely wasn't a flavor fail. It's a card that protects a creature from damage until end of turn. Back in 1995, Indestructible Aura was a fine name for a card with that kind of effect. However, this is a card that has become a flavor fail over time. Indestructible was introduced as a keyword ability in 2004, and Aura was introduced as an enchantment subtype in 2005. Almost 2 decades later, both of those are words that we're used to utilizing on a regular basis when talking about Magic, and they mean very specific things. So now, when you go back and look at this card, the fact it isn't an aura and it doesn't grant indestructibility is kind of silly. The art on the card, while perhaps not a flavor fail, is really strange. It seems to depict some bird-headed creature with completely human arms who also has some aquatic features or something, but hey, the card does seem to depict this creature having an aura, so I really can't complain about the art flavor-wise. Anyway, I only have this at number 10 because at least it wasn't a flavor fail the moment it was introduced. It only became a flavor fail over time, as new mechanics and keywords have been introduced in Magic. At number 9, I have both Caltrops and Tragic Slip. Both of these are cards in the same sort of category as Pin to the Earth, though it's the opposite here. These cards should not affect creatures with flying. Caltrops are spikes you put on the ground, and a creature can't really slip while it's airborne. Would it be a bit excessive if both of these cards said they only affected creatures without flying? Maybe, but it is still frustrating that cards that are clearly so ground-based can affect your flyers. At number 8, I have Whipperwill. So this is a bird that is depicted flying in the art, but it doesn't have flying itself. There are a lot of cards out there that look like they should have flying, and this sort of stands in for all of them, but I think this one is the most egregious, since it's also a creature type that almost always has flying. Additionally, a Whipperwill is a real bird here on our plane of existence, and it isn't a flightless one. It does spend a lot of time on the ground, but it flies all the time to catch insects. One really funny thing here is that Whipperwill actually has a very flavorful ability. As the flavor text notes, there are many folktales involving the ability of the Whipperwill to steal the souls of the recently departed. And that's exactly what this effect represents, since it exiles a creature that dies while turning off regeneration and damage prevention. So this card actually has a very flavorful activated ability, but the fact it doesn't have flying, is depicted flying, and represents a bird from the real world that can fly, and yet doesn't have flying itself, is still enough for it to make this list. At number 7, I have Silent Submersible. This vehicle should be really sneaky between the fact that it's a submarine and the fact that it's apparently silent. Something that stealthy should definitely have some kind of evasion, and Yeah, that would be a really good card since this does draw you a card when it hits your opponent, and maybe they were worried about making the card too good. I guess they didn't want to create another Smuggler's Copter, but you still could have given it some really narrow form of evasion or an activated ability that costs like 6 mana to make it unblockable. Then the card would make way more sense flavor-wise. As it is just about the least stealthy thing ever. It sits on the board with your opponent knowing it's there, and they can be prepared for it. It's clunky as heck to crew, and easily blocked on just about any board. A silent Submersible shouldn't be such an awful attacker. At number 6, I have Dragonlair Spider. This spider gives you a 1/1 insect creature token every time your opponent casts a spell, and the flavor text tells us, swarms thrive in its nest, feeding on leathery bits of discarded wings. So the idea here is that this massive spider eats dragons, and a 5/6 spider is certainly large enough to prey on a lot of Magic's dragons, so that part's pretty cool. But the idea that insects hang out in this nest seems really nonsensical to me. I guess the idea is that the spider is so big, it doesn't have an interest in hunting the insects, but at the same time, 1/1 insects in Magic are often quite large, so I'm not entirely convinced it wouldn't eat them. But the idea that the lair of a spider is a haven for insects just doesn't make a ton of sense to me, even in a fantasy game. This card would make a lot more sense if it just made spider tokens, since a spider nesting and having its young in the lair of a dragon that it ate makes a lot more sense. Furthermore, in the lower right-hand corner, you can see that the art even depicts small spiders in the nest and not small insects. It really feels like a case where they didn't want to have to include another kind of token in the set, and thus they ended up with this very strange flavor fail. At number 9, I have Guardian of Cloverdale. Before we look at this card's effect, let's check out the flavor text, which says, although they're protective of all creatures, many treefolk are especially fond of the empathic Kithkin. So, that in mind, you should expect this treefolk to enhance your Kithkin or something, but that isn't what it does at all. It does enter the battlefield with 3 Kithkin friends, and if it stopped there, the flavor of the card would be fine, but the Guardian's other Kithkin-related ability involves sacrificing them. Maybe it's just me, but if this treefolk is fond of Kithkin, it probably shouldn't be killing them, especially for such a meager payoff. At number 4, I've included an entire mechanic, Amass. This War of the Spark mechanic has you create an army creature token and put some number of +1/+1 counters on it. If you already have the token, you instead just put +1/+1 counters on the army token you already have. Basically, you can never have more than one army. You can already see how strange this mechanic is in terms of flavor. The mechanic is meant to represent Nicol Bolas's hordes of zombies, something you might think would be reflected by an ability that makes a lot of zombie tokens. Instead, it's simply represented by you amassing +1/+1 counters onto one token. While the word amass makes sense in terms of those counters, it makes less sense when you talk about amassing an army. Now, I do want to say, I think this mechanic was great in terms of gameplay, especially in Limited, as it gave us a different way to do zombie tokens, and it interacted well with the Counters Matter theme in the set, but making one really big zombie should probably have come with a different name than Amass. The idea that an army is represented by a single token just doesn't make sense. At number 3, I have the World Tree. So this land represents the entire plane of Kaldheim. It's the structure on which the plane's 10 realms are built. So the fact that you can have multiple World Trees in play doesn't make a lot of sense. It really should have just been legendary. The thing it represents is just massive and central to the story, so just having it be a plain old land just doesn't seem right. I can live with the actual effects the card has, especially the fact that it can search up gods and put them into play, but that type line just is very out of place here. At number 2, I've included another entire mechanic, Casualty. Interestingly, like Amass, this is a recent Grixis mechanic. So, Casualty is a signature mechanic of the Maestro's crime family in New Capenna. This family's main form of crime comes in their work as assassins and contract killers, who take pride in their ability to eliminate their targets. So, why on earth does their mechanic involve the Maestro's player sacrificing their own creatures for an enhanced effect? It seems like they must be pretty bad assassins if they're doing this much collateral damage. They're going to run out of hitmen and assassins in a hurry if they keep this up. Sort of like with Amass, I did like this mechanic in terms of gameplay, but when you really dig down deep to think about the flavor behind this mechanic, it doesn't fit at all. It would be a great mechanic for some kind of cult that sacrifices its own members to gain power, but that's just not what the Maestros are about. And at number 1, I have Batterskull. This is a great example of a card where they really push the power level without really thinking about anything else. What exactly about this massive battering ram indicates that it should have lifelink or the ability to return to your hand? I can sort of give them a pass on vigilance, as the idea that this thing never lets its guard down works well enough, but lifelink usually indicates a card's ability to heal or drain life, and things that can return to your hand are usually agile or fast. None of those are words that I would use to describe Batterskull. It just does a bunch of stuff that no battering ram should be doing, and it gets an extra high spot on this list because it's also a heavily played card in multiple formats, so one has to be confronted with this flavor fail on a regular basis. So those are 10 major flavor fails in Magic the Gathering. Do you think there are any I left out? Let me know in the comments. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to see the over 500 other MTG top 10s, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting the channel, you can do so by becoming a channel member, by becoming a patron, or by buying Nitsa Hone merch, all of which you can find in the description. Thanks for watching.